Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Webinar Talk Show. We have been at this for a whole year. We have interviewed some really amazing people on really important topics. It's been a lot of fun. My name is Tom Singer.
And I'm Liz Green. Happy anniversary, Tom.
Happy anniversary to you. This has been a great year of interviews. One of my personal rules is I try to talk to one smart person every day, and the Webinar Talk Show has helped me get to some really, really smart people doing cool things.
Absolutely. So last April, the world looked a little different, and we decided, both for our own sanity, I think, but also for the meetings industry, to start talking to people about the meetings industry. And you and I, for, almost a decade now, have been MCs, and very particularly bridging that gap between people who are experiencing a conference virtually and people who are experiencing that in person. We took those skills, kind of expanded, and decided to do a weekly talk show.
Well, it's so interesting because it was 8 years ago, almost maybe 9, when we started what we called the conference talk show. And the whole idea behind that was you and I believed that hybrid events were going to explode back then.
Yep.
We were a little bit ahead of our time.
We were.
And we knew that at-home audience needed a different experience than the people who were sitting in the chairs in the ballroom. And when we went to fully hybrid a year ago, and everybody and their brother was doing webinars, there was just a lot of talking heads over PowerPoint going on. We knew we should really show people why interviews can be so engaging. And so that's why we created the Webinar Talk Show.
Absolutely. And so after a year, I have lost count of the number of interviews between this show and all of the events that we MC'd. It's a lot of interviews. Let's just...
Oh, it's well over 125 interviews that we did this year.
We have some lessons that we've learned that we wanted to share. But Tom, we also have an announcement, do we not?
We do. We have a big announcement about the Webinar Talk Show. Why don't you do the honors?
Well, we're going back to our roots. Webinar Talk Show worked very well for the last year where everything was virtual. But we're going back to our roots. We're going back to the conference talk show because that's been our brand for a long time.
As of today, our show will now be called the Conference Talk Show, and we're going back to this whole idea of helping people realize how you can tie in both those in-person events and those virtual events into a great hybrid experience.
Right. And even, I think it's going to happen at some point this year, even if you're having a straight up face-to-face conference with no virtual component whatsoever, we actually know ways to really engage audiences. And that's really what we're all about. And when you and I were talking about, let's make this shift, let's actually dig in deep on this conference talk show brand, value-centered event engagement was something that we kept talking about. What does that mean to you, Tom?
Well, I think all people who plan businesses and everyone like you and I who speak and host conferences, we all are very focused on delivering the highest quality experience that we can. And that's just one of many core values that people in the events business have. And I think that we need to be focused on that as we get to sort of those in-person events and the hybrid events, and even those that remain virtual. We really need to be centered on the values of a wow event.
A wow event. And if you didn't watch it, we do have a What Does an MC Do episode, because wow is one of our roles as an MC. But Tom, last week we sat down and really talked about 5 lessons that we learned over this past year that we want to share with everybody in the meeting industry. And we're just going to talk about each one. The first lesson that we have is the stakes are even higher now for in-person, for hybrid, and for virtual, because we've been doing this now for over a year. People are hungry to be back together, But the same old, you're not going to be able to take what you did in 2019 and just plop it down and say, there you go. People expect more now.
Well, and there's two things that come to my mind when we talk about this. And number one is the stakes are higher in person because we have proven that this virtual world, the ability to come through Zoom or some other platform to be able to deliver content can certainly be done virtually. So people who are going to spend the money and the time to come to a hotel room, fly across the country and actively participate, they're going to expect really good human connection. They're going to expect real engagement on site. And for those, the second part, for those who will be participating, if it's hybrid or if it is still a totally virtual event, those people no longer have low expectations. They expect the event to be just buzzing, going. They expect the internet to work. They expect everything to be perfect. So the stakes are higher.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up that human connection part, because this is your area of expertise, really, is how are you going to actually plan for people to connect? Now, we're both members of the National Speakers Association. We are pretty good connectors in general, although that's an over-exaggeration. We still need to plan about how people are going to connect, both virtually, but especially right now in person. But if you are an association where maybe your members are not quite so outgoing, that's a challenge. What's a little tidbit of advice that you would give to people as they're thinking about how do we plan for that?
Well, I tell every client that I have, if you make the networking a second tier priority, you're going to have second tier results. And so you can't just say, well, we're going to have great networking because we have an open bar. It is not, networking doesn't happen because people have a couple of glasses of wine. Networking happens because they are in a situation where they feel comfortable enough that they can open up and share and talk and engage. And not everybody is that their natural set point. So you have to weave that into the culture of your event.
Absolutely. And really think about that social learning piece, right? People like to learn from each other. How do you set that up? How do you prime the pump so people aren't just standing there with their cocktail in the corner? Because let's face it, we are all a little out of practice.
Oh, yeah. In fact, there's studies. There's studies that have been done that show that people who go to the space station or traverse across an expedition in Antarctica, or people who are served time in solitary confinement, when they come back out, they're socially awkward. And so I think we're going to have an entire society of people going to events who might just have a little trepidation, even if they're really experienced, outgoing, extroverted. They still might be like, wow, do I shake hands? Do I elbow bump? How do I play this game after 14 months?
Well, and there's the added layer of what is acceptable now in terms of that contact. Are we going to, like NSA people, we are huggers, but now as we come out of the last year, we probably need to ask people before we hug them. We need to, like, the sensitivities of that are a little higher than they have been in the past. So planning in advance, I think, is a real big part of the answer here.
So Eliz, my wife is a meeting planner for an association, and she had her first in-person event in Austin, Texas last week. And one of the things she provided was color-coded dots you could put onto your name tag. Green was handshakes and hugs, I'm ready. Yellow was, it's cool, let's keep a little distance. And red was, I am not comfortable, please stay back. And people loved it.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. And, one color dot actually decreases the anxiety of how am I going to function in this space. Well, we got to keep going with our lessons, because we could talk about this one all day, and maybe we just need to do an episode on that part of it. So I'm putting that in the notes. Tom, what's our next lesson?
The second thing we learned is that hybrid events are here to stay. Now, 8-9 years ago, you and I thought that was going to be the big trend. Yes. But now in 2021, hybrid events are here to stay. But one of the things we learned is not every event, even some of the biggest events, not everything will be hybrid, and some things will remain virtual. So the sort of the set point for events is definitely going to be different, but we're going to see a lot more hybrid events than we've ever seen before.
I agree. And I know when we interviewed Cindy Coe, she was saying that like not everything is going to be hybrid, even though many things might be. And I think working on the sort of back end as I do in the production of events, really asking what is the value, going back to value centered, what is the value of being face to face? What is the value of providing this virtual component? And that even goes back to our last guest, Stephen Shapiro, talking about solving the right problem. Because hybrid is expensive to do.
And complicated.
Right. And can suck lots of time into getting it right. So asking right from the beginning, what's the value there? And making a decision about, well, we know right now we're going to do it hybrid because we're pretty sure that only a small fraction of our people are going to be comfortable being in person this year. But what does next year look like? I think it's going to be a really interesting trend to watch. Of course, we're hoping that hybrid is here to stay, because one of the things we love to do is be part of that hybrid experience. So what's our third lesson?
So our third lesson is that the virtual audience should not be seen as a secondary thought. Because so often, back when we started doing this years ago, so often people were like, well, we can't afford to or choose not to spend the money on having a special MC for the at-home audience, or in investing in a platform that's going to be able to give them really robust chat, because they're just the at-home people. Well, what we've seen now over the last year is that the audiences who come in remotely for certain events can be larger, and they can spend more money and make your event even more profitable. So you can't treat that at-home audience as a secondary thought, which also means you have to make sure that your speakers understand that. Because I have been to a couple of hybrid events this year where the speakers talk to the audience that's in the room, forgetting that they had 4 times as many people remotely. So the speakers have to be aware and trained to be able to talk to both audiences.
That's absolutely right. And I'm glad you brought up the chat, because I know we've both had the experience where either the chat, they just decide to turn comments off. It's like, oh no, like, no.
Don't do that.
Or there is such a delay between when a speaker on the speaker side, a speaker says something, maybe we're asking a question, and then 15 or 20 seconds later, the virtual audience is hearing it. And so that makes that ability for the speaker to actually be interacting with the virtual audience really come. Now, you can figure that out, but you have to know that that's the case in advance. So really thinking about how is the platform that you're using making that connection possible as well.
And one thing I saw at an event that was sort of by accident, it was sort of organic, but the in-person audience realized at this hybrid event that they could log on, because they paid for it, they could log on to the virtual event by their phone, turn down the volume so you wouldn't have the speaker coming at you twice, especially with that delay. And the in-person audience could participate in the chat room, which made the at-home audience, the remote audience, feel even more connected. It was the people at home who loved having the people in the audience in the chat. And so that's something else that helps bridge that gap between 2 separate audiences and makes them one.
Well, and I have to say, one of the things that I have found really enjoyable about the virtual events is that you can have that conversation in a virtual. It is considered very rude for me to lean over to you if we're seated side by side. Of course, it'll be distance now, and say, that was really funny. That reminds me of the time when we were blah, 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 blah. No, you're not allowed to do that when you're in person. But when you're in chat, you're totally allowed to do that. And I'm glad that was an ability that we have discovered over time, because
Yep.
to be able to communicate like that is awesome.
So, Eliz, what was our fourth lesson learned?
You know, I think we learned this one pretty early on, because I know we've talked about it before, but very strongly, speaking from the heart and just authenticity will win over gee whiz wow every single time. We have seen so many speakers in just their background talking directly to the virtual audience, just from their heart, and how impactful that can be, as opposed to having flying things and blah, 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 all kinds of stuff happening on screen. And I know that holds true for in-person events, because I know we have seen people get trapped by their technology on stage, that
Oh, sure.
all of this stuff is going on and God forbid it fails. But speakers who come out and are there in service to the audience will always win over splashy PowerPoints and all kinds of things like that.
And I think when you can have both, it's great. If you're a
Yes.
technologist who can use certain whiz bang tools and make things really great, that's wonderful. But you are
Mm-hmm.
inviting things possibly going wrong with bandwidth or whatever. And so we participated last year in the
Mm-hmm.
2020 National Speakers Association's conference, their 3-day influence conference, and they had a wide variety of speakers
They
over those
did.
3 days. And some of the speakers were amazing with the technology they used and the way graphics flew in and sound effects
Mm-hmm.
and fades. And a lot of them were pre-recorded, so they were able to do multiple sets and things like that. And others sat in their studio, looked into the camera, and as you said, they talked from the heart for 20
Mm-hmm.
minutes. And I would argue that none of them were better or worse because of the technology. The true great speaker who connects with an audience still is the person who connects on that human level,
Yeah.
regardless of how many cameras you have in your shoot.
Absolutely true. And I think that is the benefit also of having a professional MC, which leads us, I believe, to our fifth lesson.
It is. And the fifth lesson is working with a professional MC or team of MCs really makes an event better. And I think it's not just you and I say this because we
Mm-mm.
offer MC services to virtual and in-person events, but we've heard this over the course of the last 13 months
Yes.
from meeting planner after meeting planner who said that, wow, we had always avoided having an MC mainly to save money. But they learned in the virtual world when you had a great MC who could engage the audience, who could fill in when something would go wrong, because in the
Mm-hmm.
virtual world, speakers would vanish. In all my years of being an MC for a live in-person meetings, I never had a speaker vanish right in front of me.
Right.
But in the virtual
Well,
world,
maybe a magician.
a magician, there you go. But they always come back.
That's true.
So, but a great MC has to be able to fill in. They have to make it fun. And then they have to do the content weaving where they
Mm-hmm.
take a little bit of the messages from everybody along the way and really make it work. And then, of course, if you're doing a hybrid event, what do you think? I think you have to have two separate MCs or a team,
Right.
or else you're going to shortchange. You're going to go back to that earlier rule. Don't shortchange the at home audience.
Right. Absolutely. Because it does take someone who's paying attention to that group of people and really thinking about their needs, and then bringing that experience to everybody else and pulling it together. That's exciting when, if you're being the driver, because as we talked about, if Tom is the driver and I'm the connection person paying attention to those virtual attendees, you can say, hey, Liz, what's going on in the chat? And we can have a conversation about what has been happening in the chat. Name check people. People always love that. Maybe we could splash the comments up on the screen for everybody to see. There's lots of ways that you can make that connection really exciting and rich for everybody.
And that reminds me of when we did our first conference talk show as the hosts of the hybrid version of an audience of a conference that was taking place live. And one of the things we did is we really worked to share the live experience with those at-home people. And we did that through interviewing the speakers. And I can remember we would say, like, all right, you gave a great keynote. What do you have just for the at-home audience? And the at-home audience loved it, that they were getting sort of some personal attention that wasn't being provided from the main stage. It was just for them. And then we would interview attendees and ask them, what's the best part about being here? And what we saw from doing that was it tied those two audiences together. But the following year, more people who watched it remotely made the decision to be there in person. So I think that's where, having MCs who can make that experience the number one goal, that's what really can make things happen.
I agree with you. And I think that is even more important now as we're going back to those in-person events. There are people who are not going to feel comfortable this year. But if you can make them part of the experience this year in a way that feels valuable, going back to what we were talking about, they're going to feel more comfortable and more motivated to be part of the in-person event in 2022.
Absolutely.
It's going to take a while for us to get back full force, but we're all going to get there. I have no doubt.
Absolutely. And I think over the course of the last year, you and I and everybody in the meetings business have learned things that we never dreamed we were going to have to learn.
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't stop with these 5 lessons. I mean, we probably could have done the 50 things that we learned if we had had time for it on this show. But I think if you're watching this and you work in the meetings business, I think that, we didn't ask for these lessons. We didn't ask for this weird, hard year that came upon us that shut down the meetings industry. But if we embrace what we learned, all of us can make it so much better as we get to that other side.
Well, and as we move forward with the conference talk show, this weekly experience that we're going to do on Mondays at 11 Central Time, we really want to hear about what have you done that is new, and what did you try, even if it didn't work out? What lessons have you learned in the last year, in the last month? Because there are lots of events now starting to open up. I think that is a real service that we can provide, is highlighting the people who are innovating, who are trying new things, who are going out and saying, all right, let's get together face to face. Let's make it work. So
you just heard it from me, Liz.
Let us know.
I was going to say, that was an open call to all of you who watch this show. If you learned something, if you had an experience, good or bad, that you want to share, contact us, and maybe we'll have you as one of our guests on the conference talk show.
On the conference talk show. Hey, this episode went really fast, as they tend to do. Now, webinartalkshow.com still exists. So does webinartalkshow.live. You can still use those 2 links. They'll lead you to find us, because we're not done. We're not letting those go. But if you want to find us now under Conference Talk Show, we have 2 ways you can do that. ConferenceTalkShow.live is going to take you to Facebook, a great place to leave us a message if you have something you want to share. If you go to ConferenceTalkShow.watch, that brings us to the YouTube channel that has all of the episodes that we've done, plus some of our interviews from past conference talk shows at events. Whew, lots of stuff there. Tom, where else can they find us?
Well, if someone's looking for an MC or a team of MCs and they want to find out what we can do, especially if they're doing a hybrid event, but true for virtual or in person, and they want to learn about Eliz and me, you can go to, or me, I don't know.
And both, yeah.
You can go to conferencetalkshow.com, and there you'll find the information about hiring us to help make your event more engaging.
Absolutely. Hey, happy anniversary. I can't wait to celebrate. We are actually going to be couples together in a few days. I think we'll have a little champagne toast to a year of doing this.
I think that is a great idea. My wife and I are so excited to get to be able to come and visit you and your husband now that the world is opening up. You guys are great friends, and this has been a great year. And to be honest with you, the Webinar Talk Show now known as the Conference Talk Show, has been something that's given me kind of a lot of peace of mind and a little stability in my mental health the last year. So cheers. We'll celebrate when we're together.
Yes, we will. And I agree with you. This wasn't an easy year, but I wouldn't trade it because I get to spend a lot of it with you. So
yeah, it's been fun. And we've served some really cool clients along the way. So that's been great too.
We have indeed, and interviewed a ton of really interesting people. Don't forget, we're looking at you, meetings industry. What's going on? Share with us, because that's Tom's motto is talk to interesting people or smart people every day. We want to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you on Monday at 11 o'clock Central for the next episode of the Conference Talk Show.
Have a great rest of your day.